This video is brought to you by the amazing support from my Patreon supporters. For more information, click on the link below to go to my Patreon campaign. Hey everyone, welcome back to another painting tutorial. As always, my name is Jay, and today I'll be showing you how I paint up this Mephiston model, an awesome HQ from the Blood Angels army from Warhammer 40k. So I started off by priming the entire model black with Stynel Res primer. I really love it, using my airbrush. And then I hit all the areas that will be eventually black with Raven Black from Minotaur. Raven Black is actually a dark matte gray, similar to Gray Liner. And I'm just using this as a highlight color. That way there's a little bit of shadow in the recesses and Raven Black along the center parts. That way it'll just give a bit of a three-dimensional appearance of the color. And then I hit it with the satin varnish just to protect this coat and to create a nice saving point. That way I can mask over it and not be worried about, the paint accidentally stripping off. And if I make a mistake earlier, I can clean it up easily with some mineral spirits or white spirits. And then I painted the entire areas that are going to be red using Mephiston Red. I had to use Mephiston Red. Since this is Mephiston, it would be inappropriate to not use Mephiston Red. So I used this on all of his clothing, his shoes, all of the jewels, the blood droplets, etc. Anything that will be red will be with Mephiston Red. In retrospect, I should have used an airbrush. It would have saved me a little bit of time, but it's okay. And for this application, I thinned it down using a little bit of Lamium Medium. That way it goes on nice and thin, doesn't obscure any details, and as you can see, it's some great coverage despite the thinning down. And then I use this, of course, on his back clothing as well, and his backpack. As I said, a little bit of masking and an airbrush would have saved me a little bit of time, but it's okay. And I know that the back of the cloak is typically black in the pictures, but I really just wanted to do this red. I really wanted a solid red appearance to bring out the blood and the kind of the vampiric appearance of Mephiston. And it should be mentioned that all of the GW paints I paint with by hand in this tutorial, I did thin down with some Lamium Medium. And then I decided to finally airbrush it, and I used some of the new Citadel Air paints, Evil Sunz Scarlet. And I used Evil Sunz Scarlet with my SOTAR 2020, a precision airbrush, and I focused on the raised areas, so all of the peaks of his clothing. As you can see, I'm just trying to focus on the peak areas, leaving the recesses Mephiston Red, and then I'll be basically hitting the other areas at almost a 45-degree angle, trying to pick up on just the raised surfaces and give a bit of depth, just an extra color to these areas. A quick highlight with my SOTAR 2020, such as the backpack and his feet. As you can see, airbrushes are really awesome for producing a really quick gradient that it actually looks quite nice. And then I just focused on the backpack. And now the reason why I should mention that he's on pins right now is that I already had a base prepared for him, and that way it's much easier to just keep holding my hand and using it, especially when using an airbrush, it's easier just to hold it on pins and then paint them separately. And then I repeat this process on the front, focusing on the raised surfaces, hitting his feet and his chest at about a 45-degree angle. And then once again, I applied a nice satin varnish with my Patriot 105. That way, once again, creates a saving point and it protects the coat. You don't want it to scratch off later, and that way, once again, if you make a mistake, you can easily clean it up later. And then, just to continue with my airbrushing, I then hit the sword with Lead Belcher, the Citadel Air Lead Belcher, leaving a little bit of black at the very bottom of the sword. That way it produces just a quick gradient. We're going to go lightest to the top to darkest, essentially. I decided to add a little bit more depth into the shadows, so after the airbrushing was all done, I then hit the model with a CARROBURG Crimson Shade, and just using my thumb I wiped off the excess or the area, just that way it gets into the recesses but doesn't get too much on top of. I don't want to use it as a glaze, I just want to use it into the recesses just to provide a little bit more depth into the recesses, a bit more shading. It's just some post shading, and that's also a great reason to hit it with a satin varnish because it creates a great surface tension, which is excellent for these the application of shades afterwards. You can quickly wipe it off with pretty much no ramifications. When that was all complete and I was happy with the depth of red, I then started on the flesh, which is just his face. But I like to do several colors for the flesh tones, that way it just has a bit of a realistic color gradient to it. So I started with rat skin flesh, the darkest flesh tone from Citadel. And then I went straight to the mid-tone, BESTIGOR flesh. The reason being is I don't want the recesses to be that extreme and orangey as you can get if you combine rat skin flesh with Rakeland flesh shade. So then I went with Rakeland flesh shade over the mid-tone color of BESTIGOR flesh. That way the recesses aren't too extreme. And when that was drying, I then started on the leather areas of the model, which is going to be his gloves and some parts on his belt, with Mournfang Brown. Mournfang Brown is a nice chocolatey reddish brown in the Citadel range, of course, and it's great for mimicking leather hide, I find, especially when combined with a Rakeland flesh shade as well, since Rakeland flesh shades have hints of brown and red in it, so it's a great color for mimicking hide colors as well as going with Mournfang Brown. So as you can see, I'm just applying it nice over the hands, which are gloves. And by that point, the flesh tones were dry, so then I did a first highlight of BESTIGOR flesh, focusing basically on all the raised areas, leaving the recesses, the shaded parts. And then did a 1-to-1 mix of BESTIGOR flesh and UNGOR flesh, just focusing on certain areas like his jawline, his cheekbones, eyebrows, nose, just the details on his face that I really wanted to start standing out from the rest. And then I did one more highlight with UNGOR flesh over his eyebrows and jawline, just to make them really pop when the light hits them. And now the flesh tones are done. And then as I said, I applied a Rakeland flesh shade over the leather areas, because just when combined it creates a great leathery appearance. And make sure it went on pretty heavily, that way it really does dull it and gives that older, worn out appearance. For his hair, I like to use BALOR brown to mimic blonde, especially a more natural tone blonde, since blondes are really just a very light brown. I usually use BALOR brown. I didn't want it to be very platinum blonde and artificial. I really wanted to keep it more of a realistic tone. So a simple coat of BALOR brown, and then as always I did thin it down with some acrylic medium, some lime medium, and then I hit it with a watered down Agrax Earth Shade, so it's about a 1-to-1 mix of Agrax Earth Shade and water. That way it goes on nice and thin, but gets in the recesses and gives that older, just dirty battle hair appearance. For the white areas of the model, primarily the wings and a couple symbols, I painted them with white scar, of course, because if you're going to paint white, might as well paint with white scar. And I did thin it down as always, so it didn't go on chalky and too clumpy, as white can tend to do if you go straight from the pot. I was using it on the wings, as you can see. But I wanted the wings to have a slight blue tinge, so I will hit it then with a blue shade. So I took some watered down DRAKENHOF Nightshade and just applied it to the wings. I intentionally watered it down once again with about a 1-to-1 mix of water to shade. That way it didn't overwhelm the white and create just a very bluish wing. I wanted something I could easily highlight over again, but something that would at least tint the recesses and edges. Then I returned to Lead Belcher and painted his gun, parts of his backpack. Anything metallic will be Lead Belcher. The reason why I didn't paint this at the time was it's easier to paint certain areas with a hand brush as opposed to an airbrush. And I tend to use an airbrush when it does make sense and when it is more effective than a hand brush. Otherwise you spend all your time masking and you don't get as good of a result. I also use this to paint the needles along his legs. And the top of his cloak. I really do like the way that the Lead Belcher. What I really like about this model is the contrast of the different colors. And then I hit all these silver metallic areas with non-oil, pretty heavily non-oil. That way it gives just some tones, some definition, and dulls down some of the appearance. And we're going to use that as well for gradient. Once again, I never stop with metallics, just the base coat. I always hit with a shade, and then at least 1 or 2 highlights, usually with a dry brush to give it some texture, or an overbrush. and that way also brings up the shine again. While that was drying, I then painted all the areas that would, another set of areas that would be black normally with gray liner, which is a dark matte gray from the Reaper range. I really like it. It appears almost as a black when it's done in the shades, but when the light hits it, it's actually just a dark matte gray, so it gives a bit of depth of color. And I painted his necklace as well with gray liner, and some of the parts on his back as well as his gun. I wanted his gun to be an off black, so gray liner was a perfect fit for it as well, and all of the wiring on his backpack and his front as well. And the great thing about Reaper paints is that they're nice and thin and they don't clump up, especially on these coiled wires here. I didn't want them to clump up too much, so it was a really great color to go to. When it dries, it really does keep that detail in the wiring. I then did a quick overbrush of these areas with Administratum Gray and an edge highlight along his shoulder pads. That way, just a nice gray edge highlight, which will just add a little bit of oomph, you know, and make them really pop. But it still will be perceived by the eye as basically black, even though we're using just shades of grays for these areas. Since you really can't get a lighter color than black without going to the gray range. Makes sense. I then did a quick dry brush with IRONBREAKER over the silver areas, and as I said with the sword, I started at the top with IRONBREAKER and just tried to get a bit of a gradient going, so lightest at the top, darkest at the bottom, which was already started with the airbrushing alone. I left a little bit of black at the bottom anyway, and then the shade will still pool at the bottom of the sword as well. For the glow of the plasma gun, I painted with CALIBAN green, and of course I thinned it down, and then I intentionally went a little bit to each side and along the edges, just to produce a little bit of a glowing effect. I didn't want to overwhelm the model with an OSL, but I just wanted to produce a little bit of a realistic glowing effect with the plasma gun. I then did a quick overbrush of these areas with WARPSTONE Glow, focusing on more central parts of the plasma gun, but leaving a little bit along the edges as well. That once again to produce the glowing effect. And then finally with Mood Green, repeat this process along the very top part. You can see that it looks like there's a bit of a glow, but not too crazy. For his syringes, I just wanted to do with a quick blue, so I hit him first with CALEDOR Sky, and then afterwards I just highlighted up the more central areas with TECLIS Blue. And to give him a little bit of a glassy, syringy appearance, that there's liquid on the inside, I then did a coat of gloss varnish over the syringe parts, which kind of goes over it and kind of gives that appearance that the blue liquid is inside the syringe, not that you're painting the outside of the syringe blue. For the golds, I went to my favorite line of golds, the liquid gold range from Vallejo, specifically Old Gold, which has that older gold appearance. It's not very bright yellowy gold. It's actually more toned down, but it's a great color, and I really wanted to use Old Gold due to the contrast between the reds, you know, the really warm tones of the reds, and it would just be perfect contrast to that with the golds. And the key is when using these alcohol-based paints is, number one, you have to go relatively quickly because they're alcohol-based. They do tend to dry out very quickly on your palette. Two, I always cut it with a 99% isopropanol, because the stronger the isopropanol, I find that the better the effect and the stronger the shine, and just goes on amazingly. As you can see, just a single application with these alcohol-based golds, they look fantastic. And finally, clean off your brush frequently, because once again, it does dissolve off your brush quite easily, and it tends to really clump up very quickly, and then you have a clumpy brush. And here's what the model looks like when it was completely finished on its rocky base. I really hope you enjoyed this painting tutorial. Mephiston was a lot of fun to paint up. It was requested by my Patreon supporters, and as I said, it was just a lot of fun, very quick tutorial. But I like the contrast in the colors, and he's going to go kick butt in future episodes of Face Off because he's dying to get on that tabletop. Just look at him. And in the end, I just used a rocky base because I figured it would just make him look cool. And that's it. So as always, thank you so much for watching, but most importantly, thank you to the many supporters of my Patreon campaign. Without you, this video would not be possible, and as well as a lot of my work would not be possible. So special thank you to all these people for their support and contributions to my Patreon campaign. And for more information, click on the link below for more ways to support my videos in the future, and a link to my Patreon campaign as well. So thank you so much, all you awesome people, for watching, and once again, thank you to all my Patreon supporters out there. You are amazing. Stay tuned for more videos. Until next time, this is Jay saying, happy painting, everyone.